Hi, my name is Harrison Ockery, and this is my presentation for Effective Teaching and Learning with Scientific Inquiry. And this has been done on August 16th, 2018. So before we get started, the way that I'm going to kind of start this off is I do understand where my colleagues are because looking at argumentation and critical thinking is going to be one of our focuses for this coming school year as we move into more argument-driven inquiry, more inquiry-based lessons, and more project-based learning. So that's kind of where my colleagues are. So this is going to be an introduction to argumentation and critical thinking for them, so that we're getting more. Now, the way that I'm going to be doing this presentation is over 5 different days. So we have PLC time every other day, and I'm going to be using my time in that PLC time to go over this. So it's roughly about 30 minutes or so. And so I'm going to break this up into 5 different days. So the first one and it's going to mirror the 5 different modules that we have for this. So part 1, first day is going to be learning about inquiry. Second day is going to be about constructivism and culture of inquiry. Third is going to be levels of inquiry, learning cycles, and instruction models. Fourth is engaging and assessing inquiry. And the fifth is going to be classroom environments of an inquiry-based classroom. So getting into the very first one, kind of the key things that I'm going to cover in this very first day is just talking about what's the purpose of inquiry-based learning, some common misconceptions about inquiry-based learning, and the benefits of teaching and learning with scientific literacy. So I'll ask them right away, what is the inquiry-based learning? So we'll kind of have a nice little think, pair, share session, and then we'll discuss that. Then we'll ask a second question, how many of you use inquiry-based learning? So we'll just kind of share that. And then we're going to talk about the 10 beliefs about inquiry from the Douglas Lewin, and I'll give them an actual handout from that, and that's that link right there. And so we'll end that little portion with how have your ideas about inquiry-based learning changed, and we'll kind of just have a good little discussion. There's 10 individuals in my science department, and they're all very opinionated. They love to talk, so we have some really good conversations about that. The second part of that first day is going to be about science and literacy. So how can we incorporate literacy in our science rooms? So I'll just go over a couple different examples, and I'll find some journal entries. I got some from the NSTA, some KWL reading strategies, graphic organizers, but we've kind of gone away from graphic organizers into something we call thinking maps. So thinking maps are graphic organizers, but we don't give them constraints. So the kids make their own graphic organizer. It's a little bit different. Annotation of text, we've actually started doing this a lot with our 9th grade, and that's going to start trickling up to 10th grade. Guides to help identify key ideas in reasoning, collaborative writing, and technology to communicate findings. Day 2 of the PLC time, we're going to be going over constructivism and a culture of inquiry. So objectives for this to explain the guiding principles of constructivism and look at strategies for creating an inquiry-based classroom culture. So the first question will be, what is constructivism? So we'll talk to them, and then I'll share with them what the definition of constructivism is. Then we'll say, how do we use constructivism in our classroom? And then how can constructivism be related to inquiry? So we're just going to have a couple of different things. We'll talk through the 5 guiding principles of constructivism. So those are there right there. And so we'll have a little discussion about this. I'll have that printed off for them, and just little things that they can have for their classroom when they're planning. Part 2, the second part of the second day, is how do we create a culture of inquiry where kids are always asking questions. So we'll have a little think, pair, share session about that. And we'll discuss about what are we doing in our classrooms and what would an inquiry-based classroom look like. So this is kind of based off one of those discussion posts that we had in Module 2 and even in Module 5. So basically, like, what should it look like? And then even just asking more deeply, have any of you ever had a unit or lesson be inquiry-based? And just sharing that information, because it's one of the nice things about PLCs is we can learn from each other. And then the guide to creating a culture of inquiry. So go over all of these different parts. We need to remain flexible. Let students be curious, kind of with that Boy Scouts article. Think about ways to use tools available at our disposal. Think about investment, show an investment. Provide opportunities for experiential learning, make it real. Embrace praiseworthy failure. Integrate exciting subjects and delivery to challenge students more, and create space. So I'll have this printed off for them also again. Looking at the parts, 3 parts of inquiry, learning cycles, and instruction models. So looking at the levels of inquiry. Okay, so I like this little nice figure that I found online on the NSTA website. And I'll ask them this question: how do we categorize the different types of inquiry? And so there's 4 different levels. There's confirmation inquiry, there's structured inquiry, there's guided inquiry, and finally there's open inquiry. And this little table at the right kind of explains, exactly what happens on each of those levels. So 0, 1, 2, 3 goes with 0, or 1, 2, 3, 4. And just getting into how are we going to be doing, because ultimately the goal is to have open inquiry. At the very end, we want open inquiry, but you can't start with open inquiry because otherwise it's going to be a lesson that crashes and fails. Okay, so then getting into the next part, the levels of inquiry. What is required of teachers? What do we need to do to be able to have inquiry-based classrooms? Okay, and what does a teacher look like? So one big thing is we're going to have more feedback, guidance, and expertise and resources. So we'll talk about, because it's more inquiry-based, it's less teachers standing up front. It's going to be a lot of teachers going from group to group to group, helping students out. Students need research and analytical skills, which are really difficult to assess, and a lot of times with the standards, those aren't really taught as much. So we've actually been focusing on that with some of the science and engineering practices of the NGSS. We need extensive planning and extended time maybe needed to carry out the different aspects of science. We run our schedule on an A-B block schedule. So we see kids 2 to 3 times a week. And so this planning might be a little bit difficult for them. Okay. And part 3, learning cycles and instruction models. Looking at the 5E, 6E, and 7E different learning cycles. So I'll go through the 5 stages of the 5E. And we'll talk about, in examples, and I'll use an example lesson plan. And actually in one of my other courses, I'm making one, so I'll use that one. And that's all about cellular respiration and photosynthesis, so looking at cellular energy. So we'll talk about this, and then we'll also discuss the change. So going from a 5E to a 7C. So what are we actually doing? We're taking that engage and we're splitting up into 2 different parts. So listen and engage. And then elaborate and evaluate. We're going into elaborate, evaluate, and extend. And even with that, talking about the flexibility of if you do an engage and then you do an explore and an explain, and you have another phenomenon, being able to do explore 1, explain 1, explore 2, explain 2. Explore 3, explain 3. So being able to do all these different things.